Call the Municipal Impact Fee Extraordinary Meeting to order. Who who's running this? Blanche, are you? Okay, come on down. Way down.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Tonight we'll have a presentation for you pertaining to the municipal impact fee study results. This presentation was presented to council in a budget workshop on July 17th, and then we came to a council meeting on August 6th for authorization to proceed with the process. The process includes two extraordinary workshops, and this is the first one on November 5th, and then we have another one scheduled for November 19th. Also, we're planning to do the first reading of the ordinance on November 19th, with the second reading coming for adoption on December 3rd. After that, we have at least a 90-day waiting period before we can start collecting the increase. I have Sean Ocasio here from Raft Tillis to give you a presentation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, Sean Ocasio, Raftalis Financial Consultants. As Blanche mentioned, this is a presentation about the municipal impact fee study that we've been working on for the city that encompasses police impact fees, fire impact fees, as well as parks and recreation. So as a part of this, again, like she mentioned, it was previously discussed back in July and then I believe in August. So what this meeting is associated with is just kind of going through the study assumptions and findings and everything, and then talking about the extraordinary circumstances associated with implementation of the fees. Just as a quick overview of the presentation, it'll cover a little bit about impact fee basics, some legal considerations, discuss the method used to design the fees and major assumptions, and then talk summary findings and recommendations, and then implementation and extraordinary circumstances. So just a little bit of primer on impact fees. These are fees that are paid by new development that result in an increased demand for municipal services. So as growth is coming in, that growth places demands upon your police department, your fire department as that additional population and units come in. And then the city then has to respond by bringing on additional facilities in order to provide municipal services to that new growth. These fees are used to then pay for growth-related capital costs, and that would be major facilities, major equipment, fire trucks, police vehicles, and so on. And the whole purpose of these fees is it's a financing mechanism to allow the city to have growth pay a portion of its own way, such that existing residents aren't being burdened with the full impact of those capital facilities that growth is requiring of the city. A little bit more on some of the basics here. These fees, they have to be reasonable. And there's what's called a dual rational nexus. Essentially, what that relates to is that the impact fees that are being designed that are going to be charged to new growth have to be designed based on growth-related capital costs, that, related to expansion of facilities, new facilities, that sort of thing. And then once those fees are collected, those fees then have to be used on those capital facilities that are associated with growth. So it's tying the fee and the collection of the revenue to the use on those projects that are growth related. They have to be based on reasonable level of service standards that meet the needs for your community. There are some restrictions with the use of these types of fees. You can't use them to fund any sort of deficiencies that you have in the system, and you can't use them to pay for any sort of operating costs. So these are exclusively for capital related costs and assets. Also, the process by which you adopt these is by ordinance. Some legal considerations here. And I apologize for the typo. I know it says Florida statutes, and it should say statutes. I apologize for that. But these fees are governed by the Florida statutes, the Florida Impact Fee Act. In recent years, it's gone through a number of amendments. Some of the bigger ones took place in 2021, 2024. There's even changes that took place this year that'll take effect in January of 2026. Some of the requirements as a part of the Act, while this list isn't exhaustive, I wanted to just mention some of the more important items. One of the big ones is that the fees that are being calculated have to be based on the most recent and localized data to the community. And so as a part of that, we make sure to use your current budget documents, your call data information, fixed asset records, Anything that's associated with the city within, and recent is defined as within the past 4 years. So we've made sure to ensure that all the data used in the fee calculation is within that window and linked to the community. There's some other administrative items here about with respect to actual costs for administering the program. One I wanted to point out was the local government does have the burden of proof in the event of a challenge on one of these types of fees. It used to be the opposite years ago. That's since been changed. And then, as far as timing goes for the collection of these fees, you can't collect them before the issuance of a building permit. So it's a part of that process. Some of the changes that took place back in 2021 relate to fee implementation. We talked about them a little bit in some of the prior meetings back in July, but just to rehash them here, it relates to fee implementation in terms of a phasing protocol as well as a maximum fee increase amount. So what that protocol is if there's a fee increase that's proposed that's up to 25%, that increase has to be phased in evenly over a 2-year period of time. If it's an increase that's greater than 25% but up to 50%, then that increase would have to be phased in over a 4-year period of time. And any increase that's above 50% is just capped at that 50% threshold to be phased in over 4 years. So what can happen there is if you're doing one of these analyses and you're getting a fee level that's higher than that 50%, under a normal statutory standard implementation approach, you would never get to that full level. So one of the things that's also built into the revisions to the statute from a few years ago is that there is a set of procedural requirements associated with being able to bypass that phasing requirement and that fee maximum, that ceiling, if you will. It's called the extraordinary circumstance portion. And that's, again, what the goal of the meeting today is to talk about is those circumstances. Now, as a part of the statute, extraordinary isn't specifically defined. They leave that up to the local government to have the findings of extraordinary circumstances. What I can tell you is that some common arguments relate to population growth, increase in capital costs, impact to the community, and so on. And it's up to the legislative body to make that determination of findings. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on the next slide here. But another thing to note is that you can't increase these fees more than once every 4 years. So with the extraordinary circumstance implementation, essentially there has to be a demonstrated needs study that justifies the need to exceed that phasing requirement and that fee maximum. And as a part of that process, there are 2 publicly held workshops, this being the first of those 2, associated with discussing those circumstances that are specific to the community that justify why you feel that you need to implement at a higher rate and at a higher amount. There is another requirement of a 2/3 vote of the governing body in order to adopt under this method. So when you get to first and second reading, it requires a 2/3 vote in order to implement under that approach. However, this whole procedural set will be updated and starting in January. The bill SB 1080 that I note here makes some changes to those requirements that take effect January 1st. So on this slide here, what you'll see is the first section is its current form. Again, the demonstrated needs study that allows you to bypass the phasing requirements and the fee maximum, 2 publicly noticed workshops, and the 2/3 governing body vote. It'll be changing effective January 1st, that you can still go over the 50% maximum. However, that implementation would have to be over a 2-year or over a 4-year period of time. The other change to that is that it's a little more difficult to get that implemented because it'll go from a 2/3 vote of the governing body to a unanimous vote of the governing body as the requirement. Again, that takes place in January, so it's not really an issue here, but I just wanted to disclose that procedure will be changing starting next year. One other issue is if you go to implement fees and you haven't updated your impact fees in 5 years, then you can't use the extraordinary circumstance provision at that point in time. You'd have to just do the standard approach, and then after 4 years, tackle it again, and then you can go after it. So just some changes there that are taking place. Quick overview of the calculation methodology. Essentially what we're trying to design is a cost per unit or a fee per unit. And so as a part of that, we're looking at your costs and we're looking at units. So there's a component of the analysis associated with the development of population projections, residential dwelling unit projections, and also non-residential or commercial square footage projections in terms of development over time. We look at your levels of service, whether that's officers per 1,000, service times, acres per 1,000, depending on the fee that we're analyzing. And then we look at the capital investment as a part of that. And so we're looking at the total city investment in those various departments to date. So total investment in the police department, fire department, and Parks and Recreation. And then we're also looking at the future planned investment in those departments as well to get that cost number over the period of time. And then we're dividing that out by the units to get a cost per unit. In terms of allocating that cost, what we do is we look at your square footage data. So that's information that comes from the property appraiser records for the city. The relative relationship between residential property and non-residential property is a portion of how we bifurcate those costs. We also look at if it's applicable service call information, so essentially the demand for police service or fire service. We use that as a portion of the allocation factor, and then we also look at to something we call a functional population, which there's data that's managed by the Census Bureau that relates to persons who live in the city and work in the city versus persons who live in the city who work out of the city. It has to do with the inflow and outflow of people and then where they spend their time. And so we weigh those three factors together to come up with a composite allocation factor to take the costs for each department and split them by whether it's residential related or non-residential. And then the fee is applied on either a per dwelling unit basis if it's residential properties, or on a per 1,000 square foot or per room basis for non-residential properties. So just a quick overview of some of the major assumptions. When we look historically at your population growth, historically, we're looking at about 2.5% per year. If we look back at just a little more recently, between 2020 and 2025, that's a little higher, about 2.9% per year on an average annual basis. So pretty decent growth there for sure. In terms of the projections that we have built into this analysis on a forward-looking basis, if we were to look at the overall trend, growth through about 2050, then that's about 1.7% per year. There's been good growth that's been seen, and we project that slowly tapering off over time, but still in the near term, there's still growth out there that's coming on. In terms of where we were as of 2023, was just under 59,000 residents. That's projected to increase to about 92,000 residents by 2050, and a rough build-out estimate of about 120,000 at that future point in time. So then, switching from the unit side to the investment side, current existing investment in capital assets for your various departments. For the police department, in terms of total assets, based on the data we had, about $10.7 million in assets. Again, that's comprised of your facilities, vehicles, equipment, all of those sorts of items. And you'll note in the parenthetical there, about $4.9 million is included in the analysis. So the reason for that differential is part of the statute also speaks to what costs you can include in the fee versus what costs you must exclude from the fee. So, for instance, any very short-lived assets of a useful life of 5 years or less have to be excluded from the calculation. So that would be your smaller items. However, vehicles for, let's say, the police department, or vehicles for the fire department, supporting apparatus and those things, those can all be included. So when we make certain adjustments for what can be included and what must be excluded as a part of that, we get the 4.9, and similarly for the fire department, of the 19 million, about 14.8 million dollars are included in the analysis, and then about 22.3 million are included as far as the parks analysis. In terms of your levels of service, on the police side, it says here 2.26. That should read 2.17. So I apologize for that. But that's the number of officers per 1,000 residents that you provide for your community. That's the level of service that we then base the fees on, what you're actually providing today.
And sorry to interrupt. So for the level of service side, that's not like a statewide or community-wide. It's specifically what we are providing right now, and to continue that level of service, this is what would be required.
Yes, sir.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As far as a gauge, if we look around the state, I see communities anything from 1.9 to like 2.4, 2.5. So you're pretty much right in the around the middle there. It can vary based on specific community dynamics. So for instance, communities that I work with let's say, that are more tourist destinations in the Panhandle, if you take their officers per 1,000 compared to their permanent population, it's like 4 or above, because they have to be able to deal with the seasonal influx of folks coming in for summer break and things like that. So it can be unique to each community, but on an average basis, it's around 2 and change. In terms of level of service on the fire side, you have a target of 90% of calls being responded to within 5 minutes 20 seconds or less. And also the level of service you provide to the community, you're an ISO rated 1 community, which is the best rating you can have on the fire side. And for Parks and Recreation, your level of service target is 3 acres per 1,000 residents. You're currently actually providing a little over 8 acres per 1,000. So you're meeting your requirements there in terms of your level of service targets, and that's what we're designing these fees based on. So we want to make sure that if we're going to design a fee, that it's a level of service that you can provide and that you are providing. So we talked about the existing investment in those various departments. As far as planned future investment, there's some significant things on the horizon. If we look at the police department, the multi-year capital plan included in the analysis was about $86.1 million of capital projects. Some of the big ticket items in that are the police department's allocation of the public safety complex that's proposed. That's about $54 million of that amount. And then also a police training facility. That's about $25 million of that $80 million there. So those are the two biggest items as a part of that plan. Those are included in the fee analysis there. For the fire department, total capital plan was about $50.6 million, of which just under $42 million are included. Again, the fire department's allocation of the public safety complex coming in at about $32.3 million, and then Station 7 coming in at about $6 million. And then there's also some supporting vehicles associated with that station that comes in at about $1.5 million as well, just to go with that. The $6 million there is just the structure. For Parks and Recreation, total capital plan of just under $117 million, of which about $26 million is included. That includes land acquisition in order to maintain your level of service. That's about $20 million. And then some new soccer fields and tennis and pickleball courts at $2 million and $2.4 million respectively. Again, some of the reason for the differential between what the total plan is and what's included also has to do with if there's a project that's a rehabilitation of an existing facility, then those sorts of capital costs can't be included. It has to be projects associated with new growth, and so new upgrades and those sorts of things. So then jumping into the fee proposal, bit of a busy table, so I apologize for that, but essentially what you have going down the left side are the classes of service. For residential, residential single family, residential multifamily, those would be charged on a per dwelling unit basis. Currently, the fee for those is $747 per unit. The total calculated fee for each of those would be $1,116 and $892 respectively on a per unit basis. That's a change in the fee of about $369 and $145, or about 49% and about 19% on those. When we look at the non-residential land uses here, we have industrial warehousing, institutional and government, hotel, motel, office building, retail, and then a catch-all rate for very unique properties that may not fit cleanly into one of those categories above. These fees would be applied on a per 1,000 square foot basis, except for hotel, motel, which would be changed to on a per room basis. And the fee schedule there, you'll see $70, $540, $189, $290, $1,000, and $410 on a per 1,000 square foot basis for your existing fees. Those would be increasing. Some of them will be increasing, some will be decreasing. Industrial warehousing would go up to $124 per 1,000 square feet. Institutional and government would go down to $270. Hotel would go up to $313. Office building, $1,189. Retail to $3,602. And then the catch-all rate would go to $718. So there are some significant increases here. Again, when we look at the magnitude of the plan, I think I said you have about 10.7 or maybe $11 million in police assets on the books right now, but you have a very robust plan for that public safety complex as well as that training facility. That's a significant investment. So the cost side is increasing, and that's why you're seeing some of these fees increase correspondingly. Just as a comparable here, this is a survey of some other neighboring and other communities. The average of the survey is about just over $400 per residential dwelling unit. Your current fee is $747. That would be increasing to $1,116. These can vary again by community, pretty, as you can see here, pretty wildly, because again, the level of service that's being provided by each community, it can also vary based on what level of grant funding, what level of fee implementation did the community actually choose to implement. They may have very well calculated a fee that would have been higher and chose to implement something lower. So the comparison really doesn't speak to those mechanics behind it, but rather just a survey of how these fees would stack. On the fire side, Similar structure to this schedule, which you'll see the fees, your existing fees in the middle, $708 per dwelling unit for single family or multifamily. That would be increasing to $1,104 for single family residents. Multifamily residential new properties would be $883 per unit. And similarly, you'll see the fee structure for non-residential, some fees going up, certain fees going down, with industrial warehousing, going up to $91. Institutional government would be a decrease to $197. Per room basis for hotel motel, that'd be a decrease to $229. For office building, that would be an increase to $870. Retail would be an increase to $2636. Again, per 1,000 square feet, except for hotel motel, which would be on a per room basis. So again, significant fees here, again, because of the capital investment that you have planned for the community, the public safety complex, Station 7, and the associated equipment and vehicles in support of that. Again, another comparison here, same idea, neighboring communities. One thing I'll mention, there are some communities on this chart that are also looking to start updating their fees. We actually have a study that's just kicking off with the city of Deltona. You'll notice they're one of the ones on the far left side here on the low end. And they're about to go through this process, and they haven't done it in a while. So there'll very likely be some lateral movement to the side here, upwards in the comparison. And there's some others that are also looking into these here. So again, the relative position, a lot of communities that are engaging in these studies that also have significant capital facilities being brought on are seeing significant increases in their fees, just like you all would be. In terms of parks and recreation, this one's a more modest increase. The fee per unit right now is $1,060 per residential dwelling unit, whether it's single family or multifamily. That would be increasing to $1,358 and $1,086 respectively, or an increase of about 28% or about 2.5% for each land use type. On the comparison here, much more middle of the pack in terms of how you compare. Just depends. This is one where actually level of service can even vary even more greatly. You have a level of service of 3 acres per thousand. I think Claremont's level of service is either 7 or 10. So they're funding a different level and they have different facilities. So again, it's what you envision for your community and what you want to put in, on the capital side, and then the fees reflect that. So overall comparison, when we stack all of those together, it's still an upward movement. The survey is currently about $2,400 per residential dwelling unit. You're just a little above that average right now. You would be increasing to a total combined fee per residential single-family unit of $3,578. So some considerations with respect to implementation. As we talked about before, the residential fees are increasing depending on the fee type. Between 19% and 56%. The non-residential fees are increasing anywhere between 19%, 312%. And there are some of them that are decreasing, though. So with that, the maximum estimate, the calculated estimate of what the fees would be increasing to, generally across all of those categories and fees are increasing at a rate that's higher than that 50%, cap that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, under the statutory approach. So the implementation options that the city had were to either implement under the standard approach, which would be that 4-year phase-in maxed at 50%, or to pursue the full increase through the extraordinary circumstance provisions. Based on the prior council meetings and the consensus that was provided, that's the direction the city wants to move in with those extraordinary circumstance implementation approach. And so the next slides here will be a discussion on those circumstances more specifically. Again, the front end was mainly just to kind of refresh everyone on the cost side, since we hadn't talked about that in a couple of months. Again, extraordinary circumstances, like I mentioned before, they're not defined in the statute as to what constitutes extraordinary. There have been 2 attempts that I'm aware of in the legislature to try to define them, and they both related to growth in population in the community. One attempt had to do with how the growth of the community relates to the growth of the state. It had to be higher than that. Again, now, just because a bill was attempted and didn't pass doesn't necessarily indicate that that's the go-by, but at least it shows some direction that they were looking at in terms of population. And so when we look at the population history for your community, We're seeing that there's a growth since 2010 of almost 22,000 residents. That's an average growth rate of about 2.8% per year on an average basis. Historically, the state average growth rate over a similar period of time has been about 1.5%. So definitely significant growth that you've been experiencing as a community there. And again, that growth is then what's necessitating the expansion of your facilities. Adding a new station for fire and supporting equipment and vehicles, expanding on the police department and then those facilities. Adding additional acreage for parks and recreation in order to maintain the level of service you're providing. So all of those things. In terms of the near-term growth rate that's projected through 2030, it's about 2.3% per year, and then beyond 2030 to 2035, it's about 2% per year. So slowly tapering, but still at a significant rate for your community. The other prong to this is there's been significant increases in asset acquisitions and construction costs. So as an example, when we look back at your fixed asset records for, let's say, police vehicles, from, let's say, 5 years ago compared to the costs that are in the plan for vehicles today, you can see that police vehicles right now, with all their supporting equipment, are about $65,000 per vehicle, when previously they were between $35,000 and $40,000. So there's been a big bump up in the capital costs there, just in a short period of time that's impacting you. Similarly, on the fire side, when we look at the cost of, let's say, a fire engine from 2019, that was on the books for about $500,000. Similar engine in the plan is going to be about $900,000 to almost $1 million. So there's again been this very significant increase in the asset acquisition side of this that's impacting the fees and the cost to provide service to growth. Then as far as cost to construct new facilities, we looked at the construction materials index. It has to do with just construction costs. That index has increased over 40% since 2019. So a very high rate of climb just in the past few years due to the inflationary environment, and those costs then impact your cost to actually construct things. Also, just another measure, the consumer price index in that time period has gone up about 27%. The other prong to this, aside from the population growth that you have that's necessitating the expansion of your facilities, and aside from the cost of those facilities and assets increasing at a very high rate in the past just few years, there's the impact to the community itself if you don't implement the fees at their full level. Because if you're going to achieve the same projects, but you're not going to raise the fees accordingly, then that burden then comes back to your residents. And so if you don't have those fees in place, I don't have it here on the slide, but I have it in my notes. If you were to implement the fees, instead of using the extraordinary circumstance approach and implement them under the phasing plan, there would be a difference in the revenues collected. You'd collect less. For the police department side, that would be about $224,000 of I'll call it lost revenue that would have to be made up from other sources, from your existing residents, if you want to accomplish the same projects. And that's just from residential side growth. On the fire side, that differential would be about $300,000. And for recreation, about $178,000. So in total, about just over $700,000 in capital projects would have to be funded through the existing residents and other sources, as opposed to from growth, which again are necessitating the costs themselves. If we include non-residential growth as well, that's a little harder to model just because it presupposes that your current makeup of non-residential properties remains the same over time, and that can vary, year over year by a lot. That could raise that to, another million or so, even more. So there could definitely be some significant costs that the city would have to put down to the residents for these growth-related items. So again, with that, the significant population growth historically and projected, the high capital costs, and the impact to your existing residents, because again, these fees are paid by growth, not by your existing folks. So.
All right. Any questions for Sean or for Blanche?
I just got a couple really quick questions. I know we're tight on time here. Thank you so much for the presentation and the recap here. One, just a clarifying, just for those that are watching and those that are in the room. This is specific to impact fees, which impact fees directly lead to the developer cost, correct?
Yes, these costs are paid by the developers when new construction occurs or significant redevelopment.
So any new growth and anything that comes along with new growth needs, whether it's water needs, roads, things of that nature, new parks, this will be now passed on to the new residents that are increasing that need, correct?
Yes, these fees are being paid by that new growth and development to essentially pay for their impact to the community, because as they come on board, you're having to expand facilities to provide service to them.
Okay. And so the whole point of this is to make sure that we are not putting a cost onto our current residents and making new growth pay for itself, basically.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page there. And then the fees that are being calculated all have to be tied to some kind of project or improvement of some kind, correct?
Yes, sir.
So what happens, is there a deadline for those projects? Do I need to get that project done within 4 years, 5 years, 10 years?
I believe the case law there is if the monies aren't spent on the projects in a period of, I want to say 7 years, then you'd have to start refunding that back. So by implementing these fees with these projects included, you're essentially saying to the community, we're going to accomplish these projects in this amount of time.
Okay. And that was going to be my follow-up question too. What happens if we change direction, choose not to do whatever that project is anymore, or it comes in lower?
Mhm.
Then we do like a pro rata refund to those developers in some capacity?
If you're accomplishing the project and there's like, because you said again, one of the things with capital plans is some of new things that weren't expected will come in. So it's based on just the best planning data you had at the time, and as long as you're trying to get that accomplished, if something comes in lower, then perhaps you'll have a little bit of excess growth related revenue to go towards a different growth related project that may not have been contemplated here, but became a part of your plan over time.
Okay, understood. But 7 years is that somewhat of a hard deadline of it needs to be accomplished by then.
I believe it's 7. I've heard some communities use 10, but I want to say that it's 7.
Okay.
But I would defer to legal just to be sure.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Any other questions for Sean? I've got one, and just maybe, and it might even be for Cliff as well. Of the extraordinary cities that have gone through this extraordinary, or counties that have gone through this process, how many that you can think of that have been rejected by the state?
Well, I don't know how many have gone through the process, but everything that has been sent to the state to ask if it complies with F-180 that in any way arguably makes it more burdensome or restrictive for them to get permits has been rejected. And that's across the board. There is hope for some relief in this legislative session regarding this issue, because obviously we don't think, but we don't know that impact fees were necessarily on the top of mind of the people who passed SB 180. But the argument is being made and litigated, among others, by Manatee County that you couldn't have meant impact fees. And of course, the counter is, oh, yes, you did. So we don't know how that's going to come out. But Manatee is one of the counties that is saying, hey, what are you doing? We tried to follow all the rules. What are you doing to us? Because they increased impact fees and got sued for it.
Now, before Senate Bill 180, were there any, because you could, this was predates the 180, were there any, Cliff, do you think of anybody that had been rejected, not based on
No.
180? Okay.
No.
All right.
Not before SB 180.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Sean? If not, we'll open up to anybody from the public want to speak on this impact fees. Sure.
Albert McKimmey, 3603 Golden Gem Road. I haven't any comments as much as I have observations. First of all, I would suggest that what we heard just now is impact fees cannot be used for deficiencies. We currently have more problems with deficiencies than we do with new build. Impact fees may only be increased once every 4 years. So if we have a special resolution to increase fees now, bearing in mind we're about to look at potentially a new administration, do we hamstring the new administration when it comes in by what we do just now? In terms of impact fees, I remember when Kelly Park Road was being discussed, Mike Galvin stood at this dais and they gave some form of talk about impact fees, that they'd agreed to higher impact fees based on what was happening at Kelly Park Road. So if you're saying to me today that impact fees haven't been increased previously, I'm asking you, what was the discussion 2 years ago with Mike Galvin at this dais? I don't know. So if I don't know, and I come here regularly, I'd imagine a lot of other people don't know. In terms of fees, you're speaking about per capita fees, and we're comparing to different cities. We're comparing apples to pears, because Apopka does not have the same population density as these other municipalities. Population density does matter, because when you call out police or fire services in Apopka, they've got a greater distance potentially to go to any emergency. So we could justify having increased fees because of the population density. What else have we got here? Yeah, in terms of impact fees, if we do not imply impact fees across the board, then what we're doing is incrementally disenfranchising developers, which means that some developers are excused from impact fees, some are credited with impact fees. So that allows them an unfair advantage in selling their properties, because at the end of the day, their costs are different from the genuine developers who are paying your impact fees. So these are things that you have to decide. But all I'm asking you, when you decide, you have to look at the greater context of what we're looking at today. I do not believe we should be using any special resolutions to increase impact fees until we have a new administration.
Anybody else?
I started a business here in 2005. It took me $350,000 to open a business that was 1,300 square feet. You're talking about a $3,600 increase in increase, not total cost, increase in 1,000 square foot business. That's a massive increase just for the fire and police improvement in 1,000 square feet. You're wanting new businesses here. I think you need to look at that, reassess that. If you're wanting to make this a thriving community per 1,000 square feet, you're really putting a hankering on small businesses. Big businesses can afford it. Those big name brands can come in here. But small family businesses that you need in here to make this a family community is really going to hurt. I think you need to rethink this. And then, as somebody pointed out, and we've talked about for the last week or so, is when you talk, people keep saying, oh, that's the builders are going to pay this. The builders are going to pay this. They don't pay it out of their pocket. They charge it to the residents. So I just want to make it clear that when people say, oh, the builders are going to pay this, no, it goes into the price of the house. It's just like when when the owner of the restaurant pays for spaghetti sauce. They're not paying for the spaghetti sauce. The person sitting down at the table is paying for the spaghetti sauce. And then when we say non-residential, the people in the non-residential area are forced to use our services because it's our service area. They have no choice. They can't go to the next town and pay them to come and police or fire them or any other services. They're forced to use our services. And then we jack them up 318% or 312%. They can't vote. They don't come in here and vote on whether they get to raise this 318%. They can't come and choose which elected officials get to vote on that. They don't have any say-so to each of the five of you to say, I don't want this to happen. And yet you're going to raise them 312% on some of these services. That's unfair. They are getting taxed without representation, and they can't throw a tea party. And I think that this is, it's inequitable. They need to have the same rate we do. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Rod Olson, 3156 Rolling Hills Lane here in Apopka. I can't tell you how frustrating this is to me. Year after year, you have no increase in development fees. Year after year, you fail to do your homework. I come from a business background. I don't run a city, but every year we look at every cost center. We look at every item anticipate as best we can what's coming up with future growth. The fact that we had to do massive increases in our water rates, the fact that we're going through this extraordinary process now is because we haven't been doing our damn job. Every year you need to look at it. If you can only change it every 4 years, fine, but you don't let 4 years go until you do it. You have to look at those items. What's the impact going to be on people? This is crazy. We have to do a better job. You need to do a better job. We elected you to look out for us. You aren't doing it.
Anybody else? All right, Blanche, you want to wrap it up, or Sean, whatever?
Just before she comes, Dr. O referenced the non-residential impact, and according to the chart, what I see is non-residential is industrial, institutional, hotel, office, retail, and the catch-all that the non-residential did not apply to individuals that did not live within the city.
Right.
That's not what it said.
Right, those are property use categories within the city. So these are charged within your jurisdiction. It's not outside city. It would just be for those inside. I don't know if I addressed what you're... Okay.
And just one clarification too: these impact fees that we're discussing are exclusive to fire, police, and the parks and rec. Correct?
Yes, sir.
When was the last time that we increased any other impact fee?
The last fee you did, I believe, was water and sewer, and that was, I want to say, end of 2022?
23.
Oh, beginning of 23? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Blanche, you got any last thoughts?
That's it. We do have the final study report. I did receive that from Sean today or late yesterday, and I will share that via email with you all. Other than that, our next workshop is on the 19th for this subject. And at that time, at the council meeting, I will be bringing the first reading for the ordinance.
So we'll have a workshop before the meeting, and then an actual action item at the meeting.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to take a short 5